I think it was just yesterday I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, how long is it? How long have we been doing this?
I
And
know.
man, like over 2 years. That's wild.
It's cool.
That's a long
We
time.
stuck with it. Everybody
Hmm
thought that this would just be like a pandemic thing. And
hmm
then,
Yeah, everyone listening, you all thought we were going to quit. So suck
yeah,
it. All right.
we're still here. We're in your
Yeah.
life.
So
Well,
in
I
your
guess if you're still
face.
listening.
Also, thank you for your support. We really appreciate you.
Hello, and welcome to Middleish, the podcast about moderation in all things. I am Erin Green.
And I am Michael Gray.
Always just like making silent jokes on the so I'm the only one who can see him. Nobody can hear how he's mocking me, but I know it's happening.
I was just moving my mouth as you were speaking. Like I was, it was,
Like
yeah, it was,
ventriloquism.
you were dubbing for me. Like you were the
Yeah, you're
overdub for me.
practicing your ventriloquist act, I think.
I could never be a ventriloquist. Those dolls scare the shit out of me. Like,
Yeah,
those
they
are
look
so
rather
creepy.
creepy. Why are their eyes always
I don't know.
like they're
But
on meth or something?
like I get this. I know it makes no sense, but I find them like very unnerving. Very unnerving.
Well, if you ever watched Child's Play when you were younger, he
Well,
kind of is like a
yeah,
demon ventriloquist doll. And so I think that kind of ruined it for me, but they are creepy,
yeah,
I think.
they are creepy. I remember like seeing like on a A&E, you know how they always have like comedians and stuff. Like when we were
Hmm.
kids, they'd have like there'd always be like a ventriloquist on there. And I loved watching like comedy and stuff as a kid. And when those would come on, I'm like, nope, I'm changing the channel. I do not want to see this.
Can't watch it. It's just like
No interest.
clowns. Some people are totally creeped out by clowns. And
Hmm
so I think that's another one. I have a friend who's creeped out by birds. Like she doesn't
I've
like
heard
birds
that.
flying over her head. She gets
Yeah,
totally
I've
creeped
heard
out.
that that's
Yeah.
not like a super uncommon phobia. Do you have any phobias? And let's start this episode way off track. How about that?
Yeah,
What are
let's
your
just start
phobias,
with
Aaron?
something phobias. Phobias are not a very middle-ish concept, actually. So, and that's what we're talking about today.
Hmm Not phobias, middle.
Phobias. So I used to have a big phobia around spiders. I didn't like them being in my space. If there's one like I could see, in the room I'm in, I would be completely preoccupied with watching its movements and making sure it wasn't coming over to me. And I think by having a garden, I gradually started just conditioning myself to accept and embrace spiders because they play a really important role in the environment and
Yeah.
and in the garden ecosystem. And so I started implementing this catch and release policy around the house. Like, okay, I don't want them in my house, but I also don't want to just kill them. And so I'd
hmm
start like trying to grab them and put them outside, which is actually a very delicate procedure to grab the
It's not
spider with a
easy.
tissue if it's like dangling from a web. Oh, I have a story about that. You
Okay.
know how spiders like come down from their web? If you can just like
hmm
grab the web and take it outside, that's very easy. But if it's like on, the wall or something and you
Right.
try and grab it and you're like, don't crush the little thing.
Yeah.
It's really weird how I have this empathy for spiders now. If I take it outside and I accidentally, don't quite handle it delicately, I'm like,
hmm
oh, poor thing.
It's still got 7 legs.
Yeah, it can still hobble.
It's fine.
Um, Other phobias, I can't think of anything that's like a paralyzing fear. I mean, really, spiders used to be the thing for me, and I have just gradually gotten gotten around it.
Yeah.
How about you? I do have a story about a spider, but you
Yeah.
can
Let's
tell
do the
me.
spider story.
Okay, well,
Go ahead.
so we were at lunch down in California with our friends Dusty and Karin, who are friends of the podcast and listen. Hello, Dusty and
Mhm.
Karin. And we were at this restaurant that has like these long communal tables that are like a cafeteria table, right?
Mhm.
And Matt was sitting across from me, and I think Karin was right next to him. And all of a sudden we're like all having this conversation and Matt's face just changes and his eyes get big and he just gets up from the table and like runs around to this next table, like in a very urgent way. And I'm like, what? Somebody's choking or having a heart attack? And Karen's just frozen there. I think she saw it too. But from the rafters, it's like this old kind of industrial building with all these wood rafters up above. From one of the rafters way up there, this spider was just making its way down very slowly, and it would stop and then it would keep going and then it would stop. And you could see the silhouette of it where we were sitting. But the lady at the next table, it was literally going right down into her plate of food. And she couldn't see it because it was like right in front of her face. So she just like couldn't see it. The perspective was off. So Matt jumps into action, you know, like a first responder. He runs over there and he just reaches over her head. And he said something like, "Don't be alarmed. I just got to get this out of the way." Like just a very calm voice. And she still didn't see it until he grabbed the web and it moved in her plane of vision. And she like jumps back and all of her friends sitting with her freak out. And they're like, "Oh my God, you literally saved her life." Like, so... And I think Karen had seen it too, but she froze because she was like, "I don't know how to handle this or what to do." Because you don't want to like go run over to this stranger into her space and touch, you know, get in her face. But anyway, Matt and
That's funny.
Very rarely Matt and I will like just that story will pop in our heads and we're like, "Oh my gosh, remember that spider when you saved that lady's life?" Like that's how do you remember when you saved that lady's life in that restaurant?
Remember when you were a superhero, Matt?
Okay.
Now, if you can save a woman's life, can you quit freaking, you know, sniffing and blowing your nose and
I know.
stuff?
Can you just use a tissue like a normal human being?
Not toilet paper.
Okay, what's your phobia? Not toilet paper. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know that I have any phobias. I have like things that make me pretty uncomfortable. You know, like if I'm up like pretty high and like on like at a railing, like looking over like a balcony or something.
Oh
like
yeah, and you
way
get
up.
queasy kind of.
Yeah, like I'm okay doing it, but I'm also like, I'd rather not, but I'm also choosing to, you know, it's like, or like like snakes. Like I could handle a snake, but I'm gonna be real uncomfortable the whole time. But I'll be able to do it. Oh, you know what? Actually, like if I'm in, I can handle like tight spaces, but if I feel like I can't get out of the tight space, like like when I was a kid, I remember one time I was in this like a sleeping bag and my brother sat on the end, like that, you know,
oh,
like I'm okay being in there. I'm okay being in real constricted. That doesn't bother me. But if I feel like I can't get out,
like you're stuck,
then I start to feel kind of
that's a
panicky
problem
there for sure.
Yeah.
That's a real problem for me.
Yeah.
I think that's it though.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel
I feel very fortunate to not have that, like some debilitating irrational fear. And I know people live with that. And man, if you're listening to this podcast and you have something like that, I really feel for you. And I hope you can find your way through it because that sounds like a horrible way to, you know, go through life. So, real quick before we dive in, we've been talking about, before we got on here, Michael and I were marveling over how we've done this for over 2 years.
Yes.
And how some people probably thought we were not gonna, like this was a pandemic project and we'd just be done. And here we are.
All the haters out there.
All the haters.
You didn't believe in us, and here we are.
I'm actually really curious how many of you listening are some of the OG listeners. Like you've been listening to us from the beginning. If you are, please shoot us a text or an email. Let us know. Comment on our next Instagram post or something and let us know, hey, I'm one of the originals. Like I've been listening from the beginning.
I'm an OG.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because I still hear from several friends that are like, yeah, on your podcast, you talked about this. And I'm like, oh, you're still listening. Like for some reason, I keep thinking that we're just going to lose people along the way. You know, this is our 97th episode. So
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts I've really loved that I, you know, after 3 months, 6 months, for whatever reason, not because I didn't love it anymore, just, I don't know, you miss a couple and you kind of get into something else. And but I do know there are some, at least a handful of people I know that have been listening since day one. episode 1, which is really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool. And I
Uh-huh.
think this is a fitting topic for us to kind of review that, like, why we have that following of people that have stuck with us
Mm-hmm.
and still enjoy the podcast. I mean, I like to think it's because we're so charming and entertaining and
Good looking and
people,
charming and
yeah,
just the best personalities
people
and
can't get enough.
super humble, like
Yeah,
really, really humble. Like I always say
right.
that's the best thing about me is how humble I am.
Yeah.
So that's
Hey,
probably it.
everybody, come
Yeah.
see how humble I am.
Expert
But
at humility.
also I like to think that our concept is really relatable and
Yeah.
important and something that people need to hear. So the concept of middleish, and we want to talk today about just how this sort of came about in our professional lives and our personal lives,
Mm-hmm.
and why we are so passionate about this concept and why it can be so important for people. Because I think in this world where it's either or, and we live in this world of
Right.
extremes and dichotomy and black and white, there's really an important space where that middle-ish concept needs to be practiced. And so
Absolutely.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about that today.
So how about if I start? I'll start just kind of how my journey towards that.
Yeah, go
And
for
so
it.
I think for me, it's a little bit backwards because I think I'm naturally a person who like I see the value in the gray, right? Like there's black and white and then there's gray. And I think like since I don't know, middle
Is that,
school,
wait a minute, is
I
that a pun? Is
know,
that a
no, it's
pun?
not.
There's a
No,
value
it's
in the
not.
gray, as in the
We already
Michael
established
Gray.
that, how incredibly humble he is.
Continue.
So valuable. uh, yeah. So I think early on because my parents thought I was going to be like a social worker before I knew what a social worker was because they just saw like he likes helping people like this. And I think when you're naturally that way, you naturally see that extremes and black and white thinking often doesn't pan out because that doesn't apply to people in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not very well. And so I think I kind of naturally, just because of my personality and probably my upbringing too, like saw value in that middle-ish space, and not living extremes. Um, or even just like letting other people's beliefs and opinions, have value too, that it wasn't just mine, just what I thought, that kind of stuff. But then when I became a trainer and moved into the fitness space, I think I felt a lot of not pressure, but just like this is what you do is you have to live in these extremes, and so I felt kind of like a conflict of
Mm-hmm.
moving into that space. And I got more comfortable living in those black and white spaces, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for a while because that's just what you did and that's how you did things. And that's how people, quote unquote, got healthy, right? I mean, I used to tell people, you don't need, I think I said this on our mini pod, like, or maybe our live last month, like, you don't need carbohydrates, you don't need to do this. You don't need these things. You don't, you can just like, only eat fruits and vegetables for a couple of weeks
Yeah.
and have like one cheat meal, that kind of stuff, because I thought that's how you did it. And then I don't know what that process like looks like over the next several years. I think I dove hard into that for a while and then kind of like came back up, slowly, just as I realized like, man, this just seems to like create really crappy scenarios for people, that are just trying
Mm-hmm.
to do their best. And it really starts to create like, feelings of guilt and feelings of failure when people aren't able to like live in these black and white terms, they can't live in the all, and sometimes they're coming back to the none. And that just reinforced these really ugly cycles. And I started to see how like people's old wounds from like childhood stuff like would like get reinforced by the way we were doing things. And just kind of like, man, this, I don't like this, but I didn't know how to operate as a trainer in that kind of middle-ish place. And so I think I spent several years, and probably not up until we started talking about doing this podcast that I really like start going like, yeah, I need to like really dive in. Like I need to figure out how I can train and be a coach and encourage people to be, healthier people and live healthier lives and all that stuff. without these extremes because they're just not working. And I don't really like the way I'm reinforcing quote unquote healthy behaviors with people because that doesn't really align with just how I see things, you know. So I think that was kind of my journey. I don't really have a real solid timeline there, but it was interesting how I did feel this sort of need to abandon kind of how I naturally saw things to fit within that like role of a trainer, you know, of like it's all hardcore and it's all the time and you're always on and no days off and you know, all that crap. Um,
Yeah.
and how it just felt like a misalignment within me, you know, and now, you know, I mean, I think both of us have really dove hard into this middleish concept of like, man, there's so much space because I think if you're all or none, you have one point on each end of the spectrum, right?
Right.
Middleish is everything in between there. So it
Yeah.
can look like a million different things, you know, I think. And it's just, to me, it's not about being right in the middle, you know, like of these two things. It's everything in between the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, you know, I think we both see that middleish space. And so it can be a lot of different things that also allows you to move along that continuum as you need to. You know, it's
Yeah.
again, it's not a point where you sit, it's a whole bunch of points where you can sit,
Right.
you know, a lot of different times in your life.
Well, and don't you think that you had to sort of experience that
Mm-hmm.
extreme
Yeah.
dichotomous world of doing things just right or doing things exactly so
Mm-hmm.
and being so precise in order to like come back to your
Yeah.
own kind of natural tendency of that
Yeah.
flexibility, middle-ish kind of concept? I think it's important to experience this other way of doing things or this other belief system that I'm not saying is right or wrong. I mean, we're all different humans with
Mm.
different, upbringings and history and belief. And I know there are people that, and we've talked about this like early on, where I think our second episode, we had a great question about, is there room to have like an extreme change or, to like really just cut the cord on something and do something exactly black and white? And alcoholism or drug addiction was a common example of that. Like there is no middle-ish for alcoholism.
Yeah.
There's definitely like you are sober or you are using.
Mhm.
And so I think just to, kind of circle back to where I was going with that idea, we're not saying that middle-ish is the only way.
Right.
What at least I'll speak for myself, my idea is that I see the vast majority of people struggling with this either or black and white thinking as it relates to diet, health, exercise, and just overall life balance and wellness.
Right.
So that's where I started recognizing it. Really, for me, it was working with humans, not calculations, not
Mhm.
books, not cadavers and
Mm.
physiology and all of biochemistry and all this other very concrete stuff. It was working with human beings who have emotions and jobs and life occurrences and psychological messaging going around in their heads
Mm.
and life experiences. Like
Right.
all of this stuff was suddenly impacting the very concrete concepts that I had learned in school and that I really am comfortable with. I love the neat little mathematical, ways that we put nutrition together sometimes. I loved doing like the calculations and matching it up and then coming up with diet plans that had like the exact numbers to line up with the macros and all of that stuff. Yes, total nerd alert.
Yeah, it's okay.
I loved it. However, I kept running into these challenges over and over with people where that math and that concrete idea of how it should be done was misaligned with their human experience, with their emotions, with the things they would tell themselves. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, I was like, so how do I deal with this? Like, how do I, I could keep
Yeah.
feeding them this equation and these, these ideas of just do it. Like, just, well, this is what you're supposed to do. This is a recommendation. I can't help you beyond that.
Mhm.
Instead, I started recognizing that something that my great uncle, who is a very wise man, would always say, and to this day, I don't know, I play it over my head probably every day. everything in life is a trade-off. Everything in
Yeah.
life is a trade-off. And so to me, that just illustrates that, okay, this could be the quote right way to do it, or the best way, or the, the concrete recommendation, but there's a trade-off to that. What's the trade-off? And so I started looking for that other side of things. Like, okay, we tell people you need to eat, 5+ servings of fruits and vegetables in a day. Well, what's the trade-off? I mean, that might be really cumbersome for some people. It might be a scary concept for some people because they don't like fruits and vegetables, or they're not familiar enough with them to know how to implement that. It might be expensive for some people because they're used to a different kind of, diet pattern. So I started looking for the trade-off. And to me, that's where the middle-ish ground is found in health and nutrition and diet, is by looking at that middle. Like, okay, we have this recommendation that's very concrete, and we have this exact right way of doing it over here, or you're completely not doing it over here. What's in the middle? How can we take a step toward that? Right. And putting things a little more on a spectrum really helped me understand that, yes, where I'm coming from as a dietitian, I have all this knowledge and know-how and, this scientific experience to say, yes, this is where you want to get to. This is like the ideal way. But then there's so much in the middle, and we're all human beings. So you have to find a way to navigate all of that other stuff. And what looks quote right for one person doesn't look right for another person. And that really opened my eyes working with human beings and recognizing that, man, this client is in a completely different place with a different set of circumstances and personality than this one. So what's right for this person is going to look completely different from what's right for this person. And that was a huge eye opener for me. Yeah. And I would say that was a process. I became a dietitian in 2007. So this is over the last 15 years of my work as a dietitian and a health practitioner and an athlete myself. I have tons of stories about how I applied this to pro racing. It was a long process.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you brought this up because, and you may have said this before. When I kind of heard this in my head and I was like, did I think that, or did Aaron say that at one time? But
our minds are one.
That's right.
It's like the Jedi.
What maybe so you have ideal recommendations, like this is ideal for this theoretical person, but what's ideal may not be ideal for you, and certainly not at this point in time. And that's what I think is like, if I have a client who's eating no fruits or vegetables and the recommendations are way down the road for them, right? Like that's a massive jump. But I mean, just to fit in, if someone's eating no fruits and vegetables on a regular basis, to go to the quote unquote ideal and recommendation is a massive change. Like that's going to be really challenging for people. It just is. And so maybe what's ideal for that person is eat a piece of fruit in the day, eat one piece of fruit.
Right.
Maybe that's what's ideal. And so I think again, it's this crazy idea that, no matter what recommendations are out there or what's ideal or, what's preferred, whatever, like it matters how it relates to you and how it fits in your life and your ability and feeling like you can handle that, because for me, it's like, okay, sure. 5 fruits a day would be, man, that would be ideal. What if someone only eats 3 fruits a day for the rest of their life? Yeah. Like, are they going to be
that going to make or break
so
anything?
far behind their health? You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
come on, man.
And there's a difference
between,
there's a difference between making it doable. And I mean, this is again, part of that human behavior piece that changed my mind is if I can present some options that are actually attainable and within the reach of that person, depending on where they start. I mean, that's another thing is I went through training on motivational interviewing and client-centered, goal setting and counseling. So the number one rule is meet clients where they are. So if you can make that accessible, there's a loud car starting across the street. Hold on. Hot rod alert, hot rod alert.
Hot rod alert, hot rod alert. I didn't know we had a hot rod alert, but we do.
Sorry, my neighbor.
We need a little jingle for hot rod alert. It could
My
be like one of
neighbor
those
has
old
this.
timey cars, like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, my neighbor has this classic hot rod of some kind that he starts up and he really likes to rev the engine. I don't know if he's trying to like clean out the exhaust or something because he doesn't run it but like a couple times a month. Anyway, sorry for that disruption. I had to close the window,
It wasn't
otherwise
very
y'all
loud,
would be
at least on
okay.
my end.
Well, it's
I heard
gonna
a
get
brief
loud.
little
He's
something.
he's backing out of the garage right now, and I know he's gonna sit in the driveway and just rev
Yeah.
the engine over.
I just thought you farted. So
Yeah, it's my this is my this is my elaborate cover up.
there's a hot rod
Okay.
over there. I got a
Yeah.
neighbor.
Yeah. Here it comes again. He's revving the engine again.
Oh, he's back.
Um um okay, so back to client-centered
Yes.
education and meeting people where they are. It looks different to everybody. So that was another really profound eye opener, was meeting somebody where they are and then making something attainable, that next
Yeah.
step attainable. We talk about this all the time. What's the next right step? Like, how can you get a little closer
Mhm.
to that ideal goal? And sometimes it's helpful for people to paint a picture. I'll ask clients all the time, like, okay, if we can just play make believe for a little bit, you're 6 months or 2 years down the road or whatever, and you have reached this picture of health that you have in your mind. Describe that for me, and I'll have that client kind of go through that visualization. Like, what are they doing? What's their life like? What do they feel like? I mean, talk about your weight and body size if it helps. Like paint that very, very
Yeah.
vivid picture. And once we get that, I'll ask, okay, is that realistic for you to jump into that realm today, to do those things that you picture yourself doing down the road? And all of a sudden it's like, well, no, I have to work my way there. Okay. There's the
Mhm.
middle-ish. So let's
Yeah.
start with that first step. What's one thing
Mhm.
you can do that will put you closer to that
Right.
end goal, that visualization? That end goal might change as you go through this process. And hopefully it does,
I
because a
think it
lot of
often
people that,
does.
yeah, because a lot of people that come to us, they want to lose 20 pounds, or they,
Mhm.
need to be a size this, or they, need to be competing in some race that they don't even really want to do, but that's like what they tell themselves is an
Mhm.
indication that they've made it.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you start bringing it back to where you are and where you have to accept your starting point, because this is the truth. Like, this is where you
Yeah.
are.
You are where you
So,
are. Can't do anything
yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, like I think most of us, and I'm not talking about, weight, I'm talking about like our thoughts around our bodies and food and our beliefs about ourselves, that kind of stuff. Like most of us are where we are because we've been trying to live in extremes for so long. Like we
Mm-hmm.
are where we are in this really just like unhappy place with ourselves and just not feeling great physically, and all these really backwards, upside down thoughts around, health and food and fitness and all that stuff, because we've been just ping ponging back and forth between all and none, all and none, all and none, all and none. And when we do that, to me, the danger isn't in any of the behaviors or the habits or the tasks we're trying to do. It's what it reinforces to us, like what it says about ourselves, what it says to us, what we decide, what we say it says about us. And we kind of talked about this in the was it rewriting the script episode? Is that what it's called? Just talking
Yeah.
about the internal monologue that we all have. Um, when we ping pong back and forth on those things, we reinforce things that we probably already believe about ourselves, which aren't real healthy, helpful thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people are just ping ponging between like all or none, when you're in the all and then inevitably it falls apart and you're back in the none, like what does that tell us? It tells us, gee, I guess I just don't have what it takes. Well, no surprise, because this is what I do every time. Oh, I always fail
Yeah.
at taking care of myself. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe I'm just not a person who deserves happiness. Maybe there's all these ugly, awful things. And I think that's the real danger. It's not like taking on too many tasks at once and then not being able to handle it. It's what does that tell us? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's why there's such a danger in just continuing to live in this all or none kind of thinking, approaches. And I mean, probably the same for you, but like I have countless clients who, like when we first start, they have all these expectations of what it's going to be like to work together, of what I'm going to tell them to do, of how it's going to work. And then when we like walk away from that initial like intake conversation and it's like, okay, so you're going to, you feel like we can get, two 20-minute workouts in this week. And, you're going to, yeah, you're going to eat a fruit every day. It's like all the time you're like, this feels so good. Like
Yeah.
this feels so doable. Like I really feel like I can do this. And oh my gosh, this is so much less pressure than I thought it was going to be. And I think a lot of the times, like the struggle with moderation and something middleish is people think there's no value in it. Like it's not going to be successful. It's not going to bring about
Mm-hmm.
any change and that kind of stuff. And because we're just so, I think, short-minded when it comes
Right.
to our health, right? Like it's this month, 3 months, by this
Yeah.
summer. And it's like, okay, what about the rest of your life? Like, let's look at that. Let's start there.
Well, or people think if I don't go like full tilt into this new world of health and wellness, if I don't
Mhm.
give myself this really hard task, then I'm not going to make any progress at all. Like it's not worth
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Or if I let things slip, if I'm too easy on myself, then I'm just going to go back to the way I was. And
Right.
so there's this, you have to kind of, this is where some of the psychology comes in, where you have to kind of dig into those beliefs and be like, but is that really true? Like, is that so? I have an example for myself. As Michael and I were planning this episode, I remember my approach to chores and cleaning and doing things around the house when I was a young adult, just coming
Mhm.
into having my own apartment and my own space. I would I would have this like overwhelming stressful week with like tests and exams and work, and I just had all this going on, and inevitably I would look around my living space and be like, oh, but I have to do this. Oh, and yeah, the carpets need to be cleaned. And oh, the blinds are so dusty. And all of a sudden, I would
Mhm.
just start piling on all of this extra shit to do that doesn't need, I don't need to clean the freaking blinds this week. Like, what are you thinking? But my brain would go there where I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I've got all of this stuff that's overwhelming me. And look at how far behind you are on all these other things, Aaron. Like this
Mhm.
was my tendency to put extra pressure on myself, and some of that belief of if I'm not doing it all the way 100%, then I'm completely failing, because look at all these other things that you're letting go. So I had to, first of all, you have to build awareness around this. And it took like years of just having people present these kinds of things to me, and sometimes not in very helpful ways, because it was like,
Mhm.
you put this on yourself, Aaron. Well, that doesn't help to hear that. So
Right. It's your fault.
yeah, but I started asking myself, is this something that has to be done right now? Like, is not, can I do this, or does it need
Right.
to be done eventually? Does this need to happen right now?
Right now.
And is this helpful for me to be thinking about doing this other task and putting this on my plate right now? Do I have space for this? So I kind of would stop instead of letting myself spiral out of control, and start thinking about the practical nature of where my brain was going. And I got to a point where I could talk myself through it. No, this doesn't have to fit in this week. Would it help if you schedule a time like down the road, maybe during Christmas break, where you have nothing else to do, that you can get some of these things done and then just commit to doing it then? Having a plan is helpful for me. So if I put things on the calendar, if I project them out and say this is when I'm going to do them, it helps calm me down in the moment and keep me from extrapolating all that. So and part of this is boundaries too. If people are asking too much of you, I work with a ton of clients where time management and boundaries are the theme that we talk about.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
if you're finding that people ask you to do things, or you're telling yourself that you have to say yes to anything that people are asking you, look for ways that you can talk your way through that. Is this something that has to do? Is this the best use of my time? Can
Mhm.
somebody else do this, or can it be done later? Be realistic with those things. This is a total middle-ish concept, because you're taking yourself out of that I have to do this. That's the all thinking. I have to do it. I have to do more. I have to say yes. And if you're not saying yes, then you're saying no. And that's the none thinking. So you're in this all or none, dichotomy again. Try and find that middle. Is there some way that you can say no to something right now and yes to it later? Is there a way you can say no to something that someone else can do? So then you're saying yes to doing something more important. You get what I'm saying? So this is
absolutely
like something I had to learn about myself, because I definitely was one of those people that I just had to do more. Like in times of overwhelm, I would suddenly pile on more in my brain, and it was so not helpful. And it took a lot of years for me to work through that.
Yeah. 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 For me, I mean, certainly there have been periods in my life where I've, really struggled with all or none thinking just with eating, especially once I became a trainer.
Yeah.
I felt all this pressure to try and look a certain way and, live by these certain hard and fast rules and that kind of stuff. And I would often live in the same, kind of like cycles that everybody lives in when we try to do these things this way, is like you're doing really quote unquote good for a while. And then you have the thing and you're like, oh, I screwed everything up. So I might as well just eat all the things. And, this really kind of like just roller coaster of like, what's going on here?
Right.
Like only ice cream, that's what you're eating, or only cereal,
Right.
and then like, oh, I can only have carrots for, just like this insanity where it took me a while to kind of level that out, and find that middle-ish space for me. A place I'm still navigating in that middle-ish space is those boundaries. I'm a natural people pleaser. I want to make people happy. I was kind of like the peacekeeper role in my family. For there's a variety of reasons for that, but I do have a hard time telling people no when they ask something of me, to the extent that I've often overextended myself, to places where it's just like I am resentful and angry that this person asked me to help them or to
Don't
do this
they know
thing.
how busy I am? How
Don't you know I
overwhelmed?
can't say no?
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
dare you ask me when
Yeah.
I'm going to say yes? And that's something that I'm doing a lot better with it. I have a long ways to go, just with those kind of boundaries. That's just something that I'm working through. I'm 41 years old and I'm still like a long ways from figuring that out. But
you're probably going to be working through it when you're 81. So,
yeah, and that's
just
okay. And that's a really
part of
good
who you
point.
are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Aaron, about like middle-ish versus all or none. It's like we think we have to get to the end of everything, right? Like I have to eat perfectly. I have to exercise perfectly and sleep perfectly and stress management. It's like, no, you don't. Like you're probably never going to do any of this perfectly, and you don't need to. Like we say all the time, you just need to do a little better, because better is better, right? Like better is infinitely better. And if we only move the needle some and we do that consistently for a long time, congratulations, you have done incredible work. Like we don't have to get to the end of the line on everything. And you're probably not going to, and wanting to, I think, is often the reason we don't make any progress at all. It's like this
totally
weird thing. We try to go all the way to the end and then we just wind up right where we started,
right.
and it's like, I have no interest in managing all of the things in my personality or my belief system about myself, and like conquering them and doing them to 100%. It's like, I just want to do it better. I want to figure out, the beliefs I have about myself and I hold about myself, and how those like impact the way I'm a dad, and impact the way I'm a husband, and impact the way I'm a friend. And I want to do better at that. I don't need to do perfectly at those things, because if I'm striving, let's take like my kids for a minute as an example. Like if I'm striving for perfection all the time, then I'm passing that down to them, right? Like this is the work you need to do. Where if I'm fumbling through it, and not doing it super well sometimes and doing it well at other times, and I'm just making progress, then I'm modeling to them in a sustainable way to grow, And that's what I think like we forget about, like change. It's like change when it comes to nutrition and exercise and that kind of stuff. It's change is growth. And we can't just like say, okay, I've grown now. Like that's not how growth works,
right.
ever. Like it
I'm
is
there.
a process.
I've arrived.
Yeah. It's not like the caterpillar is like, okay, butterfly, like that's not how it works. And if we're not willing to go through the process of like changing and growing, what's going to change? Like if we can't
Yeah.
grow, what's going to change? And
Yeah.
if we can't take time to do these things and to do them well and to learn through them and to mess them up and screw them up and learn how to do them better and come back to it and try again. If we can't do all that stuff, we're never going to grow. And if we're not going to grow, nothing's going to change.
Yeah. And this circles back to it. It's important to kind of experiment with these different levels of, what looks like middleish to one person does not look like middleish to another. In fact, I found I was looking up, because I know that I've heard that the middle way is grounded in Buddhism. And it actually, I found this website called the Middleish Society.org. I'll put a link to it in our show notes. And I found it to be a really nice, it basically says that this is not necessarily a function of Buddhism, which is a religion and, this theology that we're not like endorsing that. We're just talking about this middle concept. So they're saying that the middle way is an effective way of facing up to conditions that could be discovered to varying degrees by anybody in any context. And I love that, because it's basically saying that, okay, you could put like 10 people in this very same scenario, and they are going to interpret it a little differently, take it into their own context based on the lens through which they see the world, all of this stuff. And that to me is like the essence of middleish, the middle path, the, whatever you want to call it. It's, you don't have to ascribe to a certain religion or theology to practice this. It's simply saying that, like, well, how does this appear to me, and what's the right next step I can take as it appears to me and not necessarily to anyone else. So for some people, that might be something that's a little more extreme in your world, but that's the lens through which you see it. That's okay. Like some people might say, you know what, I just need to cut out all desserts. That's not necessarily something Michael and I have, recommended or endorsed, but for that person, that might be a middleish approach, because otherwise they're going into like straight, like keto, no fruit kind of realm. And so this is bringing it back into a little more of a flexible gray area by saying, well, I think desserts are problematic. I'm going to try this. I think it's valuable to experiment in those different areas that might look extreme to another person and see how it works for you. I'm a huge proponent of that. Again, with client-centered counseling, I listen to what clients tell me and I believe them. I mean, geez, I better believe what they're telling me about their lived experience, because it's the truth. So,
because how would you have any idea if it's not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think there's been several times where, like, working with a client who has a very different history and experiences than I have, and we've decided and set goals that to me do feel extreme as the coach, but I understand how to them it's not.
Sure.
Right. And so like there's no, I think sometimes people feel like, okay, so what does middleish look like? Like, okay, so not all or none, but tell me where on the line, like where exactly is it and what exactly does it look like? Because we still want that hard and fast rules about being moderate,
Yeah.
And it's like, I have no idea. There isn't a spot, because it's everyone's continuum is different, and I can't tell you, what's going to be best for you, what's going to be middleish for you until we kind of know what your extremes are, and you talk with clients about, through past eating experiences and diet experiences and attempts at being healthier, losing weight, all that kind of stuff, and you get a pretty good sense of where they've kind of been exploring, and when those attempts at exploring new spaces have not gone well, where they're kind of like, what's their none they go back to. And so there have been times where I'm like, man, for me this would be a really extreme thing to do, but I get how it's not for them. And so okay, let's go forward with that, because it's not about what I think. It's not about what this one person thinks. It's so individual, and it has to be individual, that middleish can look like a bunch of different things. And like Aaron said before, middleish for one person may seem extreme to another. And that doesn't mean it's
Mm-hmm.
extreme. That means people have different experiences and perspectives.
Yeah. And on that, I'm still on this website. I just want to read this quick paragraph for our audience. And again, I'll post this in our show notes because I think it has some really deeper and philosophical explanations than what we're going through here. But it says the central idea of the middle way is that we understand conditions in the world or in ourselves better by relying on experience, but our learning from experience is often blocked by fixed beliefs. So, an image that might help one see how this works is of a ship sailing through a narrow passage between dangerous rocks. The ship needs to get through the strait whilst avoiding the rocks on either side. And we don't have to know where the ship is ultimately going to be clear about that. It's trying to dodge the rocks. That's the whole point. Here, the rocks represent the metaphysical beliefs that tend to block us from progress. If you make it through that strait, you might get a slightly clearer view of where to go next. But if you strike the rocks, you will be stuck and not even get that far. And then it goes on to look, kind of outline some of the typical features of these metaphysical beliefs, which they call absolutizations. So it's, again, that like all or nothing kind of thing. Like this is something that's absolute concrete in my mind and can't be challenged. That's the rock that you keep like running into or butting up against that's actually preventing you from going forward. Where if you would work your way around that rock and maybe see it from a different angle, you might be able to continue on a path that works well for you. So I really liked that analogy. And I think that, sometimes those kinds of things can help us understand some of these abstract concepts a little better.
For sure. And what I love about like that, I mean, that illustration, but also just like our whole, approach here that we're trying to convey about Middleish is like, if we're going to do, and I'm sure you run into this all the time too, like talking with clients about this, like if we're going to do this Middleish route, what we have to be willing to begin to adopt and figure out how to like bring into our lives and stuff are things like grace and forgiveness and kindness, right? Because traditional approaches towards being a quote unquote healthier person do not allow for those. It's you do it or you suck, right? Like those are the messages. Like either you're doing it all or just quit. Why are you wasting your time?
And it's all about willpower too. Like you suck because you can't do it.
Yeah. Just be more disciplined. Just be more mentally tough. Like what's wrong with you? Where this Middleish approach is like, to me, it's so crazy that like an industry that is designed and it's supposed to be like making people healthier rejects things like grace and patience and trying again and kindness. And like, what? Like these are some of the most healthy things we can bring into our lives. And we're going to get healthier by rejecting those. Like literally being like, these are a waste of time. There's no space for them. And I think for Aaron and I'm going to speak for you. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but speaking for both of us, I think we would both say that those are the most important concepts to dive into, because the reason that we don't take care of ourselves in, better, higher, greater ways over long periods of time are because we don't have these things in place, because we don't have beliefs and systems and concepts in place that allow us to do it again. Like if we don't allow these things to be a part of it, and all or none is our only option, you're getting nowhere. Like, okay, honestly, like I guess this is a rhetorical question because I know the answers, but like if you're listening, ask yourself these two questions. Okay. How many times have you tried to get healthier with extreme, like restrictive, all or none kind of approaches? How many times has it worked out? There's your answer. I don't need to hear your answer because I know it doesn't. It never does. Like it just doesn't work out for people, And so why do we keep trying to do things in a way that just never works out? And I think there's so much fear around like not being all in or hardcore, like there's all these extreme beliefs that we like attach to what a healthier person is or how they get there or that kind of stuff. And I think, and then there's all this, personal stuff or our own attempts and stories and past and that kind of stuff. But like, if it hasn't worked out, I mean, literally probably 30, 40, 50 times you've tried in your life to follow some new
Mhm.
diet or extreme workout protocol, whatever. Like, why do you think it's going to work at the 51st
Mhm.
time? It's not. Like, man, please, please, please try something different. Please try something that actually allows you to grow. Please, you know?
I will offer that the reason, like I guess the value in people continuing to try these extreme things is if they use that as perspective to grow the next time. So I have a number of clients who have come to me and they're like, I've tried every diet under the sun. I've tried this. I did,
Mhm.
I belonged to this gym where I did everything, went to the workouts like 4 or 5 times a week. So I was like totally in that camp for a while. And I mean, they've done these very like rigid and extreme things and it works until it doesn't. So,
Everything does.
how long does that last and how did
Uh,
it feel? And we'll talk about that. Like, so, okay, you did these things in the past. Why are you not still doing them? What is it that
mm,
made you stop doing that thing? And therein lies the answer to, well, these are the things I liked about it. This is what didn't work for me. And usually it's that awareness that, oh, well, I had this time conflict or my family didn't like this rigid way of eating and thought that it was, unhealthy for me to be doing this in front of the kids or I had all these different answers, but
mm,
those extreme, you know, dabbling in the extreme actually can really help you understand yourself better and learn from those experiences and can kind of nudge you toward the middle-ish concept. So
sure.
that's the only thing I'll offer with those extreme ones. I get your frustration and I get that it's like, I mean, I want to like bang my head against the desk too sometimes where I'm like, do you not see that this is the problem? Like
Mhm.
ascribing to these, you know, magic pills or this like, silver bullet, the diarrhea teas and the BS that you see on social media and all these influencers say. I get it. Like I want to bang my head
Mhm.
against the desk too. At the same time, it's really critical for us to accept that some people are going to continue gravitating towards these extremes,
Absolutely.
probably because they don't have any experience in that kindness, grace,
Mhm.
flexibility kind of approach. And until they learn it and experience that, again, I just read this passage that said our experiences are really
Mhm.
the most profound driver of behavior, then it's going to just take a while to practice that.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I work with people all the time on let's just see how this feels. Like, let's try
Mhm.
this because I'm in the business of helping people feel better in their lives. That is it. I'm in the
Right.
business of helping people feel better. That has nothing to do with the number on the scale, how many inches they lose, how many vegetables they eat a day, whatever. Those are all, healthful kinds of concepts we can talk
Mhm.
about on different levels depending on the person. But I'm in the business of helping you feel better because
Mhm.
truly, when you feel better at your core, whether that's in an emotional happy place, whether you feel better physically, you feel strong and you've got stamina, whether you feel like you're doing the right things for your health, that is where like true kindness and grace and self-love come from. So that's my jam. Like that's what I'm helping people do. And if I can help people feel better about themselves simply by changing their perspective or mindset on something, then I feel like I'm doing my job.
Sure. Yeah. But you would encourage someone to do something extreme, right?
Encourage
Like,
people to? No.
yeah. Yeah. So
No.
I see what you're saying. Like, as far as I think you're right in that anything we attempt or try, there's probably like some lessons to be learned, no matter how it goes,
Mhm.
or value or that kind of stuff. But I guess for me, it's just like I see the damage on a regular basis that extreme thoughts and extreme thinking brings to people. Like I
Yeah.
see that like the damage to, like internally about their beliefs and about themselves and how they see themselves, that I do want to scream it from the mountaintops, knock it off.
Yeah.
Because
Enough
sure,
already.
yeah, because sure, if they try an extreme thing again, there's something we can learn from that. But don't. because there's
Yeah.
things we can learn from doing it a different way. And
Yeah.
then we can actually like begin to, because I feel like, I don't know, I just think every time someone tries something extreme and it falls apart, it just, they feel what they felt before just a little more, and they
Yeah.
believe what they believed before a little more. And you're absolutely right. I think there's value to take from just about any experience, not all of them probably, but most experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And but for me, I'm just like, I just, let's not have any more of that value. Let's take
Yeah.
the ones you've already done and begin to do it a different way. Just because, gosh, it's just, people just believe such horrible, awful, untrue things about themselves that
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want to see them reinforced, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking about when my brain goes into this sort of, oh, this is the way I have to proceed, or this is the way I'm
Yeah.
seeing the situation. And my therapist might say, like, what are some other possibilities?
Yeah.
And that's a very easy and just such a simple question to ask yourself. And it's not easy to do that. It's easier for
Mm-hmm.
somebody else to ask you because they're removed from the situation, right? We've got our like
Mm-hmm.
emotional kind of, clouding of the issue.
Yeah.
So that's something that has helped, where you're saying like, oh, to keep going into that space that has been unhelpful in the past,
Mm-hmm.
into this like very rigid and, concrete black and white way of thinking. What are some other possibilities? Like, what are some
Mm-hmm.
other ways we might approach this or think about it? Really opens up that spectrum that Michael and I are talking about, where all of a sudden you have this range of
Mm-hmm.
possibilities.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be helpful to just really brainstorm those things and come up with some wacky kinds of like possibilities to just show you, like, there are so many ways to think about this situation or to approach it or to choose a behavior to change. There's so many different approaches here. It helps you get out of that stuck position of, this is the only way to go forward. I just have to
Right.
buckle down. I've got to do this thing again. Because if you keep doing that same type of behavior change or approach over and over, it's going to feel like it keeps reinforcing all of the things Michael's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I suck. I can't do it. I'm going to fail again. Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
try asking yourself that. What are some other possibilities?
Yeah.
Or let's
Yeah.
just
And
see. Let's just see.
yeah.
Let's try something. Yeah.
Yeah. And that I think there is really good, because that's an approach I take with clients a lot, is like, let's try and see.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see how it goes. And maybe it goes great, maybe it goes terribly. Probably it goes a lot of somewhere in the middle, where there are things that we can take from this, and things we can build on, right? Things that maybe
Mm-hmm.
didn't go well that we can adapt, and that kind of perspective shift, like we're talking about. Like, if we have to get it right, then that's our only option to get it right. If we get to be curious and explore, then we get to discover things,
Yeah.
and I think if we can, to me, I think that's a real foundational thing for the Middleish approach, is like, not to take this, like, this is important and it is serious, but we don't need to take it so seriously. Like, we get to be curious, we get to explore, and we get to discover what things work for us, and we get to
Mm-hmm.
discover what our Middleish is. And that's a process that takes, we might, as we're like that illustration of the ship, like, we might bump into the rocks, and when we do, that sucks, but okay, we've learned, maybe I need to take a little bit wider turn here next time. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
get to learn things from that, versus like, oh, I hit the rock, so I guess I just like give up, sailing the ship
Right.
forever. And when we can approach it with curiosity and stuff, I think we just, man, we really allow ourselves to embrace what doesn't go well, because there's value there. And we get to be excited about what does go well, because we get to build on it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when we come at it from that place, I'm not going to say like failure is impossible, but it just, man, it gets pretty tough, like, if there's value in things not going well and going well, then like, well, what's going to make you go throw your hands up and screw it? I
I'm
guess I should
done.
just start over. Yeah.
Well, and failure gets reframed into learning
Mhm.
through that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're not doing things wrong and failing. You're just learning and growing, and you're learning what does work and what doesn't work.
Hmm.
So, um, one of the last things that I wanted to mention today, specifically in the diet world, is, you know, I get people asking me all the time, like, what's the, what food should I avoid? What's the best way to eat? What do you think about this, that, or the other diet, whatever is trending right now? And I, as a dietitian, I have to accept that there are literally thousands of different dietary patterns that could work for anybody across the globe at any given time. So I can't answer that question. What is the best way to eat? What are the foods to avoid or to eat more of or whatever? I mean, sure, there's some just very general guidelines I can provide, but it's a perfect example of saying, look, there are so many ways to approach this. What are some other possibilities? It depends on where you live, what your budget is, what your cooking skills are, what your food preferences are. So if you look at some of the dietary patterns, okay, not like diets, like rigid rules, but dietary patterns that say like, okay, their dietary pattern consistently comprises of this many servings of these foods kind of thing. There's a lot of different ones that work really well. And I would argue that about 90% of the foundations of diets, whether they're fad diets or weird, wacky, extreme blood type diets or carnivore diets or whatever, 90% of those have the basic principles of all the others, which is like eat less processed food, cook at home, learn about the foods you like, make things from scratch. Yeah. Get some vegetables in there, like all these different things, 90%. And then there's like this 10% of like probably pure insanity that they have to put their brand on it and make it their own. Right. But that to me just shows that like, man, there's this whole spectrum of these two seemingly completely opposing viewpoints on diet that actually overlap a lot when you get two reasonable experts on each of those diets in the room to talk about like what are the foundations of good health and nutrition. A lot of their concepts overlap. It's just their interpretation and I have to say their way of making money and selling their agenda, because that's a lot of times what it comes down to.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
So
good?
Yeah, I think
Anything
that
else you
was,
wanted?
yeah,
That was our
I think
case
that's
for
good.
Middleish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope
I think we
made
won the
our
case.
case.
So yeah, no, jury
I hope
agrees
we
with
did
us.
too.
Yeah.
Case
Yeah.
closed.
Yep, case closed.
So, I want you to start with meaning in the mundane, because I have thought about at least 4 or 5 of them since our last podcast episode, and I have forgotten them all. So I need to start writing them down again.
I'll go.
So I'll
Yeah,
think
I
of
had
one.
one. There was one like 2 weeks ago. I was like, this is it. And I was going to write it down. And then last night I was trying to remember what it was. I was like, damn it. I have no idea. And it was a good one too. But I have a really cute one. So Kathleen was gone. She was in Georgia this weekend, visiting a friend. And so it's just me and the girls. And one morning, I think it was Saturday morning, I'm asleep in the bed, right? Just like out cold. And about 6:15, I'm woken up by this little tap on my face, right on my face. And I'm like, oh, what? And it's Sophie, and she goes, I'm here to snuggle you.
Oh my gosh. What a great alarm clock.
I was like, all right, let's go. Get in here. Let's snuggle up. And it was like the best way to start the day.
What a cutie.
Yeah,
My
it was
goodness.
great.
And I can just picture her big brown eyes being like, hello.
Like, guess what you get to do?
Cute.
Yeah.
So I have to say mine was this last weekend. Matt and I floated the Boise River, which is, I mean, the Boise River obviously runs right down the middle of Boise. I ride my bike across it, run next to it almost daily. So it's just this like normal part of the downtown area. And floating it this weekend though was just, it's about 2 hours of floating, and it's not hard. There's no like rapids or anything. But it just is this completely different perspective of the city, this these areas that I see all the time, all of my bike routes that I can picture, like riding across the river, and the running routes and what things look like from the shore, all of a sudden just feel and look different when you're on the water. And it was just this gorgeous day. We had a great float and, nice escape from the heat. And I just felt very grateful that we have this resource right here. It's like the lifeblood of, of any community is the water that runs through it. And so it just felt really, really special. So
yeah, awesome. I love floating the river. Yeah, it's so fun. Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for
just
joining
a reminder,
us.
Yeah, a couple quick reminders. If you'd like to help sponsor Middleish, you can do a monthly sponsorship. There's a link below to do that. If you'd like to help support us in other ways, you can subscribe, you can share, you can rate, review this podcast. All those things are really helpful towards just getting this message out. So if you could please do those things, that would be awesome.
Yeah. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Middleish_podcast. And we keep doing some work in that space, some reels and Instagram lives, and keep an eye there. We appreciate you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.